Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be with you today. I'm Mayor Jennifer Fitzgerald of the City of Fullerton. And today's town hall is in part of a series that we've been doing since we have all been experiencing the crisis of COVID. We felt really hampered by how we could communicate with the folks of Fullerton. And so we started these weekly town halls to talk with you about your questions and concerns and to make sure you understand what we're doing at the city in response to COVID and in response to other issues. I wanted to give you some general updates, but before I do, the main focus of today's town hall is public safety here in Fullerton, and I'm so pleased to be joined by our police chief, Bob Dunn. And Bob and I will have a robust discussion today about our public safety philosophy here in Fullerton, as well as reforms and improvements that we've been focused on to make sure that we are responsive, transparent, and accountable here in Fullerton as far as public safety. So I'm eager to get to that. And we do have a lot of questions that have been pre-submitted on this topic, so we'll try to get through all those. Those of you who are joining us on Facebook, if you want to submit questions and comments, I would ask you to go ahead and do that on our Facebook page, and we'll try to get to those as well. I ask and expect everyone to be civil and respectful to each other. That's how I'll treat you, and I ask you to treat me the same way. Before we get into our public safety discussion, let's talk about just some general updates related to COVID. We launched this week here in the city 2 programs to assist residents and business owners facing financial hardship due to COVID-19. We passed the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and that provides one-time emergency rental assistance grants up to $1,000 to Fullerton residents. You can fill out the pre-screening application at cityofFullerton.com/rental assistance. And I'll ask city staff if they would just put that up on the comments section. And then also we launched the Small Business Emergency Grant Assistance Program, which provides grant funding to small businesses employing up to and no more than 99 full-time employees, full-time or full-time equivalent employees. Eligible businesses can receive up to $25,000. So you can visit, again, cityofFullerton.com and check out the city news section for more details. So these programs were funded, I want you to know, through one-time federal funds called the Community Development Block Grant CARES Act funding allocation. We have no funding source here locally for those kinds of programs. The city has none of those. So we depend on funds that come from the federal government, the state government, and the county government to help with those kinds of programs. I also, and if you're like me, you love our annual event, and it really is truly an important, it's the most important celebration we have, isn't it? The independence of our country. So we encourage you to enjoy 4th of July in your neighborhoods with your family and friends. And we also encourage you to use, if you choose Safe and Sane fireworks, the local nonprofits here in town depend on Safe and Sane fireworks sales each year to fund their services here in Fullerton. And those fireworks booths open around town July 1st. So if you choose, I hope you'll pick your favorite nonprofit to support through that effort. I also want to make sure that you know we encourage safety. Our police department is aggressively pursuing illegal fireworks operations, and we ask you to report illegal fireworks by calling the City of Fullerton Police Department at 714-738 6716. Let's turn to public safety now. And I want to talk a little bit about the history of the Fullerton Police Department. So as background, I came on the city council in 2012, and that was in the wake of the killing of Kelly Thomas, a schizophrenic homeless man who died after an interaction with our police downtown. Unfortunately, it took a tragedy like that to really mandate reform of our police department and a real examination of our police practices and our training, our review of use of force, you name it. This community had to dig in to how we were delivering public safety in Fullerton and see how we could improve. Many of you will remember that time. It was a horribly difficult time. And I'm really proud that over the course of 2012, the city council at the time, working with then police chief Dan Hughes and the Office of Independent Review, Michael Giannacco, who came in and did a full review of our police department. We set about reforming our police department to make sure that what happened to Mr. Thomas never happened again. And I'm pleased to say that in that report, the final report that Michael Giannacco issued, there were 52 reforms that he felt this city's police department needed to institute. 39 of those reforms had already been instituted by Chief Dan Hughes before that report was made final. And the police department set about instituting all the rest of those reforms. I think that tragedy, unfortunately, sometimes it takes tragedy to make you re-examine things that you've just taken for granted before. But it helps you understand that you can't take those things for granted again, and that constant examination of how you deliver services is critical to the lifeblood of your community. And I'm proud that in Fullerton, we have shown since that tragedy in 2011 how much better and improved our public safety can be through an honest examination and reform. And I know this council, as well as Chief Dunn, are committed to constant examination. I want you to know that before the Kelly Thomas death, there may have been up to a 20-year period, I think, where no Fullerton police officer had been fired. Since Kelly Thomas's death, in that next year, 9 officers were fired from our department. And I know that Chief Dunn, since he's come on board, has had to get many more people off of our out of our police department than had ever been done in the past. And I want you to know that because it's important that you understand we take all of this extremely seriously. And there's no longer a day in Fullerton where we allow problems and problem officers to stay in our department. With that being said, again, I'll emphasize that we continue to have a professional relationship with the Office of Independent Review. And they do annual checks of our use of force policies, as well as internal affairs investigations, to make sure that we are constantly examining, as I said, and making sure that we provide the best public safety possible here in Fullerton. So Chief Dunn, with that said, I would welcome you to our discussion today, and thank you for your time. If I left anything out or mischaracterized anything in my opening comments, I welcome you to correct that. And then also, I want you to start off just by talking about your philosophy of public safety. I mean, you've been with our department since January of 2018. You're coming up on your first year anniversary as our police chief. I think you know this, but I want the people of Fullerton to know this. I'm extremely proud that you are our chief. And I am so thankful to you for the kind of leadership that you not only model, but provide to your department. So thank you for that. But I would just welcome you to make some opening comments. And then I want to get into your philosophy of public safety and the reforms and the examination that you constantly do for our department.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor, for having me today, and all of you in our community who are joining us for this town hall. I agree with the mayor's assessment of the Fullerton Police Department from 9 years ago and today. My philosophy as it relates to policing is to be community-centered. It's to celebrate the things that we do well and own the things that we don't. And I can give an example of that. So I came, as the mayor indicated, I came here in January 2018. I came as a police captain from the city of Anaheim Police Department, where I was a lieutenant. Shortly after my arrival, there was a newsworthy event involving the then chief of police and a police captain, my partner and my boss. And almost overnight, I was made the acting chief of police. We had already been on a path, I think, under the previous chief's leadership of re-examining all of our systems, recruitment and retention, personnel, how we handle administrative investigations. And so my kind of mantle since then has, one, to be very present in the community, invite the community to be present with us. And we've done that through a host of things we can get into later. And then also, when we take a look at the department, we take a holistic look. And I want to say at the onset of this, what I have found here at Fullerton is that the greatest asset to our community is the people that work here at Fullerton PD from this department. That is our department's greatest asset, is the people that are here. They have been in lockstep with me. They have been champions for change and accepting of change and wanting for their department to be the premier police organization that it is in this region.
Thanks, Bob, very much. I'm struck by the fact, I mean, I think the people of Fullerton deserve to know just how much our department has been a leader among departments in reform. And so why don't you talk a little bit about some of our firsts? And I'll just preface it by saying, let's talk about our homeless liaison officer program. Our Fullerton Police Department was the first department in Orange County to establish full-time officers that are homeless liaison officers. We were the first in Orange County to institute body-worn cameras by all of our sworn personnel. So let's talk about some of the firsts.
Okay, if you go back to the OIR report from 2012, one of the things that they identified very early on was that we needed officers with specific training in the area of homelessness so that we could better respond to what at that time was more of an emerging problem in our community. Now it seems to be more prevalent. And so at the time of that incident, there was one full-time homeless liaison officer in the city. And it was recommended that the department somehow find a way to have 24-hour coverage of homeless liaison officers, or HLOs. With budget constraints, that simply just cannot be. However, what we've done is we've expanded it by one, and it's the same staffing as that we did in 2011, is the same staffing model we have today. So we have two full-time homeless liaison officers. So it's 80 man hours a week that go and interact and offer services to our homeless neighbors. They do that.
They are not the only ones. Let's make sure everyone knows they're not the only ones who deal with our homeless neighbors, and everyone is trained. So will you talk about that?
Sure. Let me just finish up this piece on the HLOs. What they also do is they serve as the point of contact for our relationship with the Orange County Healthcare Agency that provides for us a mental health clinician, and then also CityNet, which provides the homeless outreach that we do 5 days a week. And so sometimes our officers are accompanied with them. But all of our officers go through a host of training, and I have it listed here. Just give me 1 second to pull it up. sometimes you just have too much.
Absolutely.
Oh, here we are. So all of our officers go through a 2-day crisis intervention training. That training was started in the wake of the Kelly Thomas incident and was prescribed in the 2012 report. It's still something that goes on today. That's 2 days, 16 hours. And in those types of trainings, we're talking about what our homeless population looks like, what kind of things that they're experiencing. Is it mental health crisis, addiction issues, and how we can look for alternatives to enforcement and be more focused on providing services to get people on a pathway to success. We also attend a 4-hour POST training, and POST is the Commission of Peace Officer Standards and Training, which prescribes training for law enforcement agencies throughout the state of California to include mental health updates every year. And that the purpose of that is to first allow the officers to understand that they need to be able to recognize when someone's in mental health crisis. So we may get a call of someone engaging in some sort of illegal behavior, especially somebody, one of our homeless neighbors. But when the officers have that encounter, it's important for us to understand that that person has other issues that may be manifesting themselves. And so the first part is recognizing that there might be some sort of crisis going on and then responding appropriately. And that might be calling a CityNet outreach worker, that might be involving our mental health clinician. And so I often get the question in this vein, do we enforce or do we community police? And I think it's a kind of a melding of both. We're called there maybe for enforcement, but we end that call with community policing. And so these trainings help foster that mindset in our officers so that arrest isn't the first tool that they always use, but is a tool on their tool belt to use. All of our academy recruits get 21 hours of training with people with disabilities and crisis intervention. And I get asked often about what does that training entail? Again, it starts with recognizing that some of our members of our community, whether they're homeless or live in a home or in a facility, are in mental health crisis or have an addiction issue. And so we need to approach that appropriately. So helping the officers recognize when that's the case, and that might be the impetus for the call for service. And then de-escalation techniques where we're talking to the individuals, offering them alternatives, creating space, time, and distance to the extent that we can while still protecting the public. And then sometimes it ends in the arrest. And that's really what law enforcement is here for, right? Is to maintain order in our community. But it isn't the first tool that we always reach for. And then our HLO, specifically the 2 officers that do this on a full-time basis, have 95 additional hours of training related to mental health. And like I said, then they partner with those entities that go out and do non-law enforcement centered encounters to try to get people the services that they might need.
So what does that mean, non-police enforcement services?
So when our HLOs go out with an outreach worker from CityNet, they're not starting their day with going to areas where our homeless neighbors are camped with the intent of enforcing or conducting enforcement. What they're going there for is to protect or liaison with the members of our outreach teams while they engage in offering services. And what we've learned through the years is that we don't always get someone to say yes to help on the first try, but we have to keep trying. And sometimes it takes 10 tries, or sometimes it takes someone who's in real crisis, or they can no longer feed their addiction and they're in need of medical help, and we can help them connect with those, and then we can actually wrap those services around the individual. So hopefully once they're medically stable, they could get into some sort of program to help them get to deal with their addiction issues. That being said, we also get calls about those that are criminal in nature. For example, oftentimes we'll get calls of people defecating or urinating in public or blocking the sidewalk for members of our community who have disabilities. And so there are times when we have to go out there and conduct enforcement. But what I have seen our officers engage more in is they advise the individuals that there is a violation of the law, especially when we're talking about the ADA compliance issues. And many of the members of our homeless community are amicable to moving and allowing those with disabilities to get by. So those days when they're with our outreach teams and with our mental health clinician are not enforcement-centered days, they're service-centered days, and trying to offer services to our members of our community who need them.
Good. Will you thank you very much for that. And what I heard you say was there's crossover benefit in the mental health training. Obviously, it's not just our homeless neighbors who may have something else going on. It's any scene that you come onto, any individual that you are interacting with. I think everyone in Fullerton appreciates that extra mental health training, and that all of your officers do ride-alongs with those two homeless liaison officers to understand firsthand what's going on in our community with regards to homelessness. Will you talk about any changes that you've seen with the institution of body-worn cameras? I would assume it makes it much easier to investigate what really happened.
It does. So in 2012, well, I should say maybe it's closer to 2015, the city of Fullerton was the first city, and I worked in Anaheim at the time, and there was a competition between the two chiefs to see who could get the body-worn cameras deployed first, and Fullerton won. I say that now because I work in Fullerton. Kidding.
Except that it's true too.
It is true. It is true. And what I found when I got here was a very robust system of copious recordings. We employ them on every contact that we make with the public. We have worked, and for those who watch the budget closely, we have worked with the city manager and our elected officials to fund the program to the point where we have the storage capacity necessary to continue this program. We have the newest cameras that Axon offers. And so we are getting the best information we can from those calls for service. And so our officers have integrated that into their daily patrols. We require it when they're rolling code 3, so we can watch when they're responding. And then we conduct random audits. Our sergeants are charged with auditing their people and flagging any behavior that they think may be inappropriate, or at the same time, commending officers for a good job that they do that they wouldn't otherwise report when they can see it on a camera. It also offers us an opportunity when someone files a personnel complaint to have firsthand information from that scene that we can look at before talking to the officer and before interviewing the complainant, just to kind of have that neutral view before we get started. And so we use those in all of our personnel cases. And if an officer had failed to activate a body-worn camera, they're held accountable. It's mandatory, and when you don't do it, then there's accountability for that in the form of progressive discipline.
Good. Let's talk about accountability, because I know that that is in the uppermost of your mind. It's in the mind of the council and the residents of Fullerton. So when I know that you have focused on recruitment and retention of police officers, command and control, and accountability. So talk about, I will say with recruitment and retention, that's been this council's priority as well, because we need to recruit highly qualified people to be members of our public safety team, and we need to be able to retain them. So that means we have to be competitive with other cities, what other cities offer to the personnel of their police departments. So talk about what you mean when you say command and control and then accountability.
Okay. So for command and control, one of the things that I noticed when I got here and working with the then chief was that our watch commanders, so the lieutenant, the first level manager, they spent a majority of their time, if not their entire day, in the office and commanding the watch. And for me, that's not a model that's successful for delivering the proper service to any community. And so one of the things that we undertook right away was to have our watch commanders be present in the field, and looked at the duties that they had that tied them to their desk, and then divvied up those duties amongst staff here to the extent that we can with the staff that we have, to free up those watch commanders to be in the field. And the idea behind that is we want our sergeants interacting with officers on calls and our community to get that kind of on-site feedback. And then we want our lieutenants checking to make sure that our sergeants are doing their jobs correctly. And then what we did was we took, for as far as command and control goes, we took a look at our internal affairs process. So when someone files a complaint, and you can file a complaint by sending me an email, you can file a complaint by coming to the counter and getting a form, which we keep on the outside. You don't have to ask for the form. I've started internal affairs investigations based on comments on social media. So there's a host of ways that you can complain, and there's a host of ways you can commend too, because our officers do good work out there. But there's a host of ways that you can get your or express your displeasure with our service. And so when we take those, we must investigate them. We're not throwing them away. The law requires that we investigate them. That is audited by OIR. And moreover, after a change in the law, I think 2 years ago, there is a specific box on that form that talks about if you feel that any bias played a role in your contact with the police, you check that box. That means that a copy of that case through an audit is sent to the Department of Justice, and they oversee to make sure that we're doing the right thing as it relates to investigating that case holistically. So what we did was we brought all levels of the organization into a review of those complaints. So if the complaint is filed, it's the supervisor's job to compile all the data, body-worn camera, the complaint form, any type of interview that they did if the person complained in person, and then they aggregate all that together and send it to the watch commander, who has a first level review. And it travels up the chain to the captains and then over to our internal affairs. They will do the investigation, and then we send the case back to the lieutenant of charge of that watch to have them review the case in its entirety to make sure it's complete, one, and then two, opine on their thoughts about the officer's conduct and whether or not it's sustained. And then that case is presented to the captains, and then in staff with the chief, the captains, and the lieutenant that did the review, as well as our internal affairs. We discuss the case, and then I impose discipline at the chief's level. So we needed to bring the managers better into that process for command and control.
And then I'm sorry, I will admit I was a little distracted because there's some great comments on Facebook as we're talking. So maybe if we could move real quick, there's a lot of discussion on Facebook with us, Chief, that is talking about moving crisis intervention out of the police department and into community services. And I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that. My response to that is, I agree. We ask our police department to do much more than historically police departments do. And the homeless liaison officer program, the first point of contact with the homeless in our community, that's a prime example of that. In my mind, there are a couple reasons for that. The first is that we have to go with where the funding is. And the homeless liaison officer program is a program that's funded from the state of California through the North Orange County Public Safety Task Force. That funds the homeless liaison program, as well as our partnership with CityNet. So there is no specific funding for cities to have crisis intervention teams outside of our public safety. And so we're pretty much held hostage as to where the funding comes from and where we can apply it. Now the state has, direct funding for these kinds of mental health issues. The counties have specific funding, but cities don't. And so again, we have to go where the funding is, as well as we have to make sure that the folks who go out from the city to interact with people who potentially may have these issues, we have to make sure that everyone in that situation remains safe. And our police officers and our CityNet folks who go out together help us to do that. Chief, what would you have to say to that?
I agree wholeheartedly. We would not be able to provide the services that we're providing now in the city of Fullerton without the help of the Public Safety Task Force. It solely pays for all of CityNet's efforts, the 5 days a week. And that funding ends at the end of this next fiscal year with uncertainty as far as further extension of that funding. And I also agree that there is a safety factor. We have partnerships with Orange County Healthcare Agency, for example, and our mental health clinician who rides with our officers. What we do is we try to do things like the officer's uniform is more subdued. We drive a vehicle that's not black and white to try to break down those barriers. So people, when we show up, it isn't in an officious way. It's in a way that allows for our clinician to do his work with our assistance just to make them safe. The same thing applies for child protective services. There are oftentimes we're called by Child Protective Services social workers who need to go to a home. They won't go by themselves. They want the police to accompany them there to make sure the situation is safe. And once it's rendered safe, we allow the social worker to do their job. So I agree that we need to take a look at how that's done, and I would support the conversation about that. But I think that there will always be a safety component that needs to be kind of matched there, and that's probably where the police fall in.
Yeah, I agree with you. Talk about your Chiefs Advisory Council and the work you do in the community, getting to know neighbors.
Sure. So that was one of the recommendations from the OIR report from 2012 was to start a council of people from the community who talk to the chief directly about matters relating to community. And so Chief Hughes started that. And then I've continued that. I found them to be an excellent source for information, both historically about the police department, historically about what this Fullerton community thought of their police department, and what's currently going on in their community. So I have a 10-person Chiefs Advisory Council. Their names, biographical information, and their district in which they live in is on our website, and you can look it up under About FPD. We meet once a month and discuss matters relating to various things from policing to national conversations to specific problems in their specific neighborhoods that need to be addressed by the police. This year, we've undertaken, pre-COVID, each member is hosting a meeting at their home where they invite their neighbors or somewhere near their home if their home isn't large enough to accommodate us, where I attend and we talk to the neighbors in that area. Generally, that culminates with a walk to somewhere around their neighborhood where they show us the problem spots, and I bring officers with me so we have a better understanding of what the community is going through. And so I find that group is incredibly helpful to me. Many of them are very active in our community and invite me to various events where they all volunteer or where their kids go to school for me to interact and understand what's going on in our community. Another thing that I've done, which I enjoyed very much, is every Friday in February, I do a foot beat through the city of Fullerton. Generally, that's guided by requests from members of my Chiefs Advisory Council, and I take 2 officers and we just walk. And again, the purpose of that day is community policing, not enforcement, and we walk some of our most troubled neighborhoods and interact with the people and get to know what's going on in the neighborhoods.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for that. And there is so much national discussion right now, and rightly so, on use of force and complaints, and how you are monitoring your officers' interactions with people, and how you keep them accountable. And you talked earlier about a progressive discipline schedule that you go through. So will you talk about use of force, de-escalation, and how you deal with someone who could be a problem officer?
Sure. So as far as it relates to use of force, there is no more important aspect of our job that we need to look at, scrutinize, examine than the use of force, anywhere from verbal to physical to lethal force. And so when I got here, we realized that we had a very robust computer system that was being unused for that. And when I say that, we use a program called IA Pro and Blue Team. It's the same program. And it has a component that tracks use of force as well as applications of techniques, times of day, whether they were successful or not. And all of that was not being utilized. So what we did then was begin to utilize that section of the program so that we can monitor what is being used, if it's being successful. If it's not successful, can we train to that technique, or should we get rid of the application of those types of techniques? And then also it gives us an early warning if there's an officer who tends to use force more than other officers. The system alerts the command staff so that we can take a deeper dive into that individual and deal with them if there's violations of policy. And so we're now getting better at utilizing that system and getting better data out of that system. That data also drives our trainings. Every year we have what we call payback trainings, that 10-hour day training, where we take situations that have happened in the previous year and utilize those as a basis to train officers. And we look at it from tactics, training, policy, procedures, and equipment, and what we can do to be better at our job and to not use force if we don't have to. All that being said, there are times when force is appropriate and necessary, and that's another aspect of our job. Most of us hope that that doesn't ever have to happen. And so that's kind of what we're going to in that vein. As far as discipline goes, what I found when I got here is the need when we get someone's complaint, whether it's internally generated, I don't like something that I saw on social media, or a person from our community complains about an interaction they had with their officer, we don't just look at what the actual complaint was. We take a holistic look at the individual officer and the individual instance, and if there's other policy violations. So if someone were to complain about an officer was disrespectful on a car stop, and then we find that they didn't record the contact on their camera, then the officer would be held accountable. If we have proof that there was disrespect, they will also be held accountable for not utilizing their camera, because that's a violation of our policy. And what I'd found in the past that sometimes those ancillary things were not dealt with. We just dealt with the specific complaint of the individual. And so my philosophy is to be more holistic in our approach to those things. It's not to intentionally get the officer in more trouble, but it's to say, this is the standard, we work to the standard, and if you don't work to the standard, we're going to hold you accountable to what it is.
Thanks, Chief. On Facebook, we're getting a lot of people are participating, and I really appreciate it. And of course, we're not going to be able to get to everything, but this is an ongoing discussion that we need to have. Someone mentioned that they want to know what changes are we going to make, that we're just talking about the changes that we already have made. And that is purposeful, because we have made a great deal of changes in this town over the last 5 years that it's very important that we all know about. We need to know what the starting level is here, and then we can look. Oh, and we always look for constant improvements. But I have asked the chief all these questions about what's already going on, because I feel like it's important for all of us to understand that our police department isn't some other city's police department. We are unique to Fullerton, and we have been focused on examination and reform since 2011, and it's critical that we all know that. There are a lot of questions on Facebook about our budget, and I know I've gotten a ton of emails about that as well. I know the chief has, and I made a statement in my town hall last week saying that that we have reduced the budget of the police department, and immediately people started questioning that, because the total amount going to the police department is higher than it was last year. So we wanted to explain that a little as well. This current budget, the 2021 proposed operating budget that the council has approved, it was developed using the same service levels and programming from our prior year. But that operating budget includes all of the salary and benefit information, as well as supplemental operating costs. The main things that are different that increase costs is that the retirement benefit that goes to all public employees, police officers as well, goes up every year. Regardless. And so our PERS cost will go up by about 12% for the police department in this coming fiscal year. And we're contractually obligated to pay that. There's nothing we can do about that. Also, health premium costs have gone up. They're projected to increase by 7%. And then we also, and we'll get into this a little bit, we incorporated our some IT budget and information technology budget into the specific police department's budget, because Chief Dunn has been operating as our interim IT director. And I will say, as an aside, I'll go on that tangent for just a second to say that most of you may know we had a significant security breach in our information systems over the past some years. And there's a criminal element to it. And our IT director is no longer working. Our administrative services director, who would have filled in as the interim, there was no one in that position either. And so because of Chief Dunn's past IT experience, and because there was a criminal element into that security breach, We asked Chief Dunn to take over managing that IT department on an interim basis. And that should be coming to an end, much to the chief's relief. That should be coming to an end fairly shortly. But I do want to thank you, Chief Dunn. You have more than enough to do as our chief of police, but like everybody who works for the city of Fullerton these days, you're doing more than one job, and we really appreciate that. So going back to the budget, though, I do want to tell you that we have had to severely cut our police budget, as we have had to cut every department in this town because of our budget situation that we have. We were already running a very lean, very tight budget before COVID. We were running almost a 20% vacancy rate among city employees. And we've had to make sure that that continues, as well as a hiring freeze. And that applies to the police department. Throughout this year, we'll have ongoing departmental cost reduction reviews. And the city council approved to keep vacant 6 different sworn police officer positions. And those are the things that we are doing at this point to just make sure that we have a balanced budget here in town. And so every department, including the police department, has had to sustain cuts. And Chief, if you want to address any of that, please do. And also, there's a lot of discussion about the resources that you have, specifically the SWAT resources that you have, and that Fullerton doesn't have a SWAT team. Now, I know you're a part of the North Orange County SWAT team, and you provide very vital services to North Orange County. So will you talk a little bit about being part of that SWAT team?
Sure. It's a conglomerate of cities: Brea, Placentia, La Palma, Fullerton, and La Habra, that have been in contract with each other for about 20 years to provide SWAT team services to any of those communities. Not one city has the burden of providing it to just their own. They pool their resources to provide those services. There are services that unfortunately are sometimes needed. They are services that we utilize when we have to perform high-risk search warrants. And the example that I gave in the last town hall, which I think got missed by people, was our SWAT team, so Fullerton's, but part of North Orange County SWAT, had to serve 6 search warrants in Los Angeles for burglars that were burglarizing homes in Fullerton. And the model that we utilize when we do those types of operations is what's called surround and call out. And in order to do those effectively and safely, we need to have armored vehicles to do that. And so the city of Fullerton does provide for a Bearcat that was paid for out of the Urban Area Security Initiative some 10 plus years ago here in Fullerton. So we got a grant from the federal government through monies to pay for that piece of equipment. That is a piece of equipment that is available to any of the municipalities that I mentioned in this area that are part of our team. Unfortunately, there are situations where those need to be deployed, and I'm charged with providing for the safety of my officers, but for the safety of the community as well. And so I support having those types of equipment, but we don't use it to patrol the streets of Fullerton. That's not the model of policing that we do here. We have it should we need it, or should any of those other participants need it, but we deploy it when it's appropriate, and only when it's appropriate. And that is congruent with a lot of the agencies that surround us.
Thank you very much. We'll go to as many of the questions as we can get to. We've been answering some of them, of course, as we've gone. And one of the questions that's coming up is the need for external review of our department. And so maybe you'll talk about what external review mechanisms do we have in place?
Okay. So the first part I will talk about is the discipline process. So there is external review in the discipline process here in Fullerton. That's not very common. It's something that is rather unique to our particular city, and that is as the discipline process progresses. So I kind of outlined how the personnel investigation goes. So let's, for example, say that the chief of police says the officer misconduct rose to the level of termination, and I give the officer a letter that says I intend to terminate you. They get, by law, a hearing with the chief of police to say that that's too harsh, or to accept the discipline, or whatever they'd like to do. Once that takes place, and if I still intend to fire them, then the next level of review outside of this department is the city manager. The same hearing takes place. The city manager can either agree or disagree with me. And if the city manager agrees, it goes to arbitration. And the sum of that arbitration is given to the city council, the elected body of the city of Fullerton, to make the final determination. And so that, for me, represents one level of outside oversight. It wasn't the same in the city that I had come from.
And I would just say, as a member of the city council who has gone through at least 3 of these, I think 4, in my time on council, it is a very robust process.
So the other part is the Office of Independent Review. The Office of Independent Review has unfettered access. They can come and ask me for anything that they want, and I give it to them. They're a part of the investigative team, so they have unfettered access to the documents that they need to properly oversee our efforts, specifically as it relates to how we do police personnel and misconduct investigations, the type of discipline that I impose, our policies and procedures. They also look at all of our uses of force and opine on our reporting procedures, whether they think that our finding of impolicy was appropriate. And you can see that goes all the way back to the 2012 report and has been happening. In 2016, they created another report, and they're doing another one as we speak. And so we also have that group who produces this report, and then it's released to the public. I want to be very specific about this because there was some confusion in the last town hall. It's not on our website. It is on OIR's website. I also have a copy that I will have scanned and put on our website. But they produce those reports and then the response from the police department. And if you go back to that 2012 report, point by point, the chief of police responds to those and what we're doing to either adopt those or why adopting them on its face is not possible, but we can do things in similarly. And so to me, that's also another very robust outside oversight. And then the last one would be my Chief Citizens Advisory Committee. They too, we talk about not by specific officer, but we talk about discipline problems, things that are going on in the organization, and our tactics, policy, procedures, and training. And they also provide me the feedback that's necessary to make better decisions as it relates to having a department that's reflective of what the community wants.
There is a question, Chief Dunn, about regardless of reform that we've done here in Fullerton, that this person still thinks there are issues of bias that affect the way that officers interact with people of color. And it asks what further changes we think need to be made to make sure that people of color are safe and treated fairly in their interactions with police. I mean, we live in a city that is a majority minority community. If I have my statistics right, I think 28% of our population is Asian, 22% is Hispanic. And I know that you've focused on recruiting and retaining a diverse police force. So maybe you can talk about the diversity in your department and then what you actively do to train and educate and identify potential issues of bias.
Okay. So if we talk about the department as a whole, there are sworn officers and our civilian professionals who are integral to the success of this organization. 52% of our department is Caucasian, 3% is Black or African American, 34% are Latino. We have a 6% Asian and Pacific Islander makeup, 1% American Indian and Alaska Native, and then there's 1% that have 2 or more of those, and then Native Hawaiian is less than 1%, and that makes up the 206 total employees we have here at the police department. Of that, we have 137 males, so 66%, and 69 females, or 33% of our department is female. And that doesn't include our volunteer programs or our cadet programs, but that's just employees. That's how I would say that the department's made up. What I would also say is we train about implicit bias. We train our officers and hold them accountable to the fact that someone's race, creed, religion, orientation, whatever it is not a basis for how we do business, and it will not be tolerated here in Fullerton or any other department that I'm aware of. What we need to do is understand that People need policing that is constitutional, that is empathetic, that is directed at the needs of the community, and that's what we're committed to do here. We will root out any type of hatred for any reason, whether it's race or otherwise, and we will not tolerate it here. One of the things that's on the horizon for our department that's already instituted in larger agencies is Racial and Identity Profiling Act, or RIPA. It's AB 953. People can go look it up. Our reporting time comes in 2023, and it will be where our officers are logging their encounters with our community and answering a set of specific questions. That data will then become available for the public to see who we're stopping, why we're stopping them, and if there's any type of bias in that or perceived bias. And so that is something that we're working with our vendors right now to have a robust reporting mechanism from. And I'd be happy to put that on our website when it's instituted.
Thanks very much. There was a question that came in relative to why can't we come up with a better budget to try to address homelessness and get people into housing instead of throwing more money at the police? This is what, from my perspective, I want you to know that the City Council has allocated funds to help the homeless get off the street and into supportive housing, into shelter. And that's apart from the police budget. So a couple things that I'll go through for you is that we spent $29 million in a housing bond into affordable housing projects here in Fullerton. We invested $500,000 in the Bridges at Kramer Place, which is an emergency shelter in the city of Anaheim. We also have invested $500,000 into the Placentia and Buena Park homeless shelters. The Placentia homeless shelter opened in May, and the Buena Park shelter will open June 30th. These are all funds that we've been able to get from the state government, and we do all we can to leverage state and county funds because we get no direct funds to the city for these purposes. We also have invested $500,000 into the Fullerton homeless shelter, which will be open in July, and that's at 3535 West Commonwealth in partnership with the Illumination Foundation. We also have local partnerships with many nonprofits who serve the homeless community, including Pathways of Hope, OC United, Women's Transitional Living Center, and as we've talked a lot about here, CityNet. There's another question about, there's an unrelated question that came in that I want to answer real quickly about the streetlight outages on Southgate here in Fullerton, Highland, and Orangethorpe. I want you to know that Southern California Edison and the city have been working on it. These transformers are no longer made, so it's very difficult to get them, but that transformer is on order. And we know that it's been a long time they've been without streetlights, and we're working on it. We just talked about the homeless shelter. Let's see, there's another question. With the current political climate and the $0 bail, what measures is the city taking to ensure that residents, their property, and the students of the 4 colleges that Fullerton has are safe? Does the police department have the resources to respond to not only those property crimes, but any potential looting or rioting? Chief Dunn, I know you've been interacting with peaceful protesters in town for the past month, and maybe you can address that.
Sure. Yeah, the short answer is yes, we do have the resources. What we've had to do over the last year is really pare down those other services that we were providing, the gang units and the directed enforcement teams, to focus our efforts on patrol and investigations. The two things that are really the bread and butter of law enforcement is to handle calls for service and investigate crimes. And so we put our resources into that. And we're probably about as low as we could possibly get in both of those areas, and still provide the proper service. However, when we respond to things like civil unrest or looting or rioting, which we did not have in our city, we had one event where some one broke someone's windshield as they drove by, and we made it an appropriate arrest in that case. We rely on mutual aid. Part of that is through that North Orange County SWAT agreement that we have. So we get those bodies for free, just like we would send our bodies to another protest in another city, and we would carry that burden. So there's reciprocity there. We also have access to a very robust network of additional mutual aid throughout the county, because the Orange County Police Chiefs and Sheriffs Association have protocols about sharing resources should a particular municipality need them. And so we're constantly having those conversations amongst the chiefs, and then looking at what we have here at home and deploying them appropriately and to provide the best service to our citizens.
Thank you very much. Let's see, there's a question about Black Lives Matter and as a movement, and this person wants to know what my thoughts on this are. And I will just say that, as I said earlier, we live in a very diverse community where almost 30% of our residents are Asian, over 20% are Hispanic. I believe every life matters, and we passed a resolution, our city council unanimously at the last meeting, affirming our stance on anti-discrimination, and that we respect every life. Everyone should be treated equally. Another question came in about the records of Fullerton Police Department's administrative investigations being available on the website. But Chief, when they went to the website, they couldn't find it. So could you let people know where they can access administrative investigation information?
Sure. I want to clear this one up a little bit too, because I thought I was rather specific, but maybe my message was misconstrued. The law does not require or allow us to put all of police officer records online, but the ones that are in response to SB 1421, Senate Bill 1421, which is certain cases meet certain thresholds and they are to be released to the public by mandate, as well as AB 748, can be found at www.cityofFullerton.com/SB 1421. I looked at it today. It's on there. And I did not say that it were on the PD's website. There is a special place on the city's website to get them. And I would encourage people to go there and take a look at what's available. We're the only city that I'm aware of that actually posts them on the website for anyone to go get them, not just the original requester and sending them directly to them.
Thanks, Chief. Another question came up about police department vehicles, the funding for police department vehicles that are not funded out of the police budget, and how much of the city's budget's being spent on the police. Well, police department vehicles are funded through, it's called an internal service fund. So it's not specifically in the police department budget, but it's an internal service fund that each department pays into. And last year, the Fullerton Police Department paid into that internal service fund $476,000. There's also other police funding that is used to fund vehicles. Chief, could you talk about the asset forfeiture funds?
Sure. When we do complex narcotics investigations that result in the forfeiture of funds, after the court case is cleared, the department can receive some of those funds back. And so we maintain an asset forfeiture fund from those. And this was another clarification apparently needed from the last town hall, was the marked units, the cars that our police officers are driving to handle calls for service, for the most part, are purchased through the city's budget in that internal service fund. When we want to do something above and beyond, because we do not have the funding to replace our unmarked cars, we did not have the funding to provide that all black vehicle to our HLOs to try to provide for a different vehicle that wasn't so officious looking. And then our police motorcycles, which, to be quite frank, were over 10 years old. All of those have been either paid for by the North Orange County Public Safety Task Force grant or asset forfeiture funds this last year. That's the only way we've been able to do anything above and beyond. So I want to be very clear on that.
Thank you very much. Let's see, another question came in, and I know we're running a little over time. We try to keep these to an hour, but we have just a couple other pre-submitted questions I want to get to. And those of you who are submitting questions on Facebook, again, we appreciate it, and we'll do our best to post answers where there are answers to those questions. I want to try to talk about this question. The independent reviews work, the Office of Independent Review and the Police Chiefs Advisory Council all exist well, the Police Chiefs Advisory Council exists to be a sounding board to the chief of residents, to help the residents get to know each and every neighborhood here in Fullerton and other things. And then the Office of Independent Review is an external review capability. But this person who wrote in said that neither of those groups has any true oversight capabilities or disciplinary power. And should Fullerton have an all-citizen oversight committee? The city council, when we debated the reform issues and everything post Kelly Thomas, discussed this thoroughly. And we decided to hire the Office of Independent Review, as we've talked about a lot here today. And the true oversight comes from your city council. And, and I would just say there was a comment on Facebook earlier that encouraged me to be more objective and less supportive of our police department. I want you to know our city council supports our police department. And I am a proud supporter of public safety in this town. That does not make me someone who doesn't ask tough questions and holds accountable our police department, but every department here in town. And your city council is your true oversight of your public safety. Another question came in, Chief Dunn, about the 8 Can't Wait campaign and the 8 reforms that people are encouraging police departments to institute. Can you respond to the 8 Can't Wait reforms?
Sure. We put it up on our, I don't know if you can see it there, but we did put it up on our social media platforms, pretty contemporaneous to that movement being out there. It talks about our policies. You can click on the link and go to the actual policy and read it for yourself. And I can go over some of the highlights. The first one is banning chokeholds and strangleholds. First of all, those haven't existed in police work for 2 decades or longer. We use what was called the carotid restraint hold. On June 7th, I stopped the practice of using that hold. The governor had called for posts. Remember, I talked about earlier the peace officer standards and training. They decertified any training that we had. And so for that reason, we discontinued the use here in Fullerton. And so you can go on to that same page that has our policy manual, also has a directive from the chief saying that that is gone as of June 7th. Their duty to intervene. Our officers have the duty to intervene and report excessive force. You can go to our policy and look at it. You can also see on that form who provides our policies, why we go with the company that we choose to go with to provide our policies so that it represents the best practices in our profession, as well as legally sound ones based on changes in case law, which can happen when a judge makes a decision. Otherwise, I'd have to provide staff to do that type of search. We require de-escalation techniques, and you can read that in our policy. The use of force continuum is, again, it's a term that hasn't been used in our profession for probably 2 decades or more, and it talks about what our force is more congruent with what the federal guidelines are by the Supreme Court about reasonable force that appears necessary at the time. Banning shooting at moving vehicles. We discourage the practice of shooting at a vehicle to try to disable that vehicle. But to blanketly ban the shooting at moving vehicles is a very difficult decision to make, because there are times when people who are in cars have guns and want to use them and shoot. There are times when people who have cars, they use those cars as weapons to run people down, and we're not talking about officers. Our officers have the requirement to move out of the way and not precipitate a shooting based solely on the fact that someone wants to hit them with their car, unless there's no other place for them to go. And so that if you go to our Facebook page, you will see on there the form that we created, and I'll look to see if it's on our website, and if it's not, we'll make sure that it's on there. But it looks just like this, and it's called In Service to Fullerton, and it addresses all 8 of those, as well as where our policies are derived from.
Chief, thank you very much. In closing, Chief, would you just let people know In case of an emergency, how do they contact the police department? And when they have an issue to report that's a non-emergency, how do they report that as well?
Okay. So if it's emergency, dial 911. We also have text to 911. We prefer if you're able to call us. It makes the transition seamless, but you can text us to 911 too, and it will happen based on what your location is. And then if you have a non-emergency question, or if you want to report fireworks as something that is common now, call us at 714-738-6716.
Thank you. And you just had, I think, a post yesterday about illegal fireworks. Do you want to just mention that as well? I know there was a question about that on Facebook too.
Yeah, and I know I might have confused the issue when I said 60% of my time is spent on homelessness and 40% is on fireworks. I'm talking about at this particular moment in time.
Yes.
I'm dealing with a lot of complaints about illegal fireworks. And so what we had done previously was we had our directed enforcement team. It's 1 sergeant and 2 investigators who had been working behind the scenes to interdict illegal fireworks coming into our town, and they were successful in 17 different operations of getting some 1,200 pounds of illegal fireworks. Now that that was in preparation, and now as we get closer to the actual holiday, they are transitioning their efforts into more neighborhood-centered activities. They will be doing surveillances in those areas, and they will be interacting with people who are using illegal fireworks and taking enforcement action. I do want to apologize to all of the people that have emailed me that I haven't been able to get back to yet. I'm working on that, but I want you to know that we are making efforts, and much better than last year, because last year we didn't do this to the same level. And I do want to address one more thing. I get this question a lot about why don't we have a hotline for people to call so they can report fireworks. We looked at doing that this year. It was an incredibly expensive venture and this happens to be part of IT. And so we simply couldn't afford it. But we felt also that it's best if you utilize our dispatch center, we could get the metrics out for the comprehensive reporting that our council requires after the holiday to show about police responses and what type of efforts have been done. So please continue to call our dispatch center, and we would do the very best we can to get there in a timely manner.
Thank you, Chief. Do you have other closing comments?
I just thank you, Madam Mayor, and the community for being a part of this today. I'm happy at any time to answer any questions. I know there will be some folks that email me after this, and I will do the best that I can to get back to you. I get a lot of, especially now, a lot of correspondence, and it's just me. We didn't go over the structure of our department, but we're running pretty lean. At the top of the thing here, I have a part-time person helping me, and so a lot of my time is spent doing things above other ranks. And so I will do the best that I can to get back to you in a timely manner. Don't think that I'm ignoring you. You will get a reply from me at some time.
Thanks, Chief, very much. Thank you, Chief, for joining us today. Again, I appreciate the work that you do and your work with the City Council to always be re-examining your policies and procedures to make sure that we have the very best police department that we can. And I thank everybody for joining us here on Facebook. I know that all of us aren't going to agree on a lot of these issues. And I encourage you to stay involved and stay productive in your involvement. And I make that same promise to you. So until we meet again to discuss other issues, I wish you health and peace, and we'll see you then.